Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to take the sources you share and, well, really get straight to the heart of what you need to know. Quick insights, those aha moments.
Exactly. And you've brought us some really fascinating stuff today. It centers around something that seems simple, just a name.
Mm-hmm.
But as we'll see, this one word, this name, it carries, well, immense weight and meaning.
That's right. Today we're diving into the Old Testament, specifically looking at the name Yahweh. How significant was it? How often did it actually appear?
Yeah.
Because the sources we have suggest it was incredibly pervasive, used in all sorts of ways. And it hints, maybe, at some surprising things about the relationship the people of Yahweh had with him,
Yeah.
through that personal name.
And our goal, really, for you listening, is to understand how the ancient Israelites used this personal name properly, appropriately, and what that reveals about their connection to God. It's not just knowing about God, is it?
Yeah.
It's about the depth of relationship this name seemed to enable.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The source material kicks off with the priestly blessing, Numbers chapter 6. What's the main point there regarding God's intention for his name?
Well, what's really striking, I think, is that Yahweh himself commands his name to be used for blessing. This wasn't just, a nice idea they came up with.
Right. It was instruction.
A direct instruction to Aaron and his sons. And the repetition in the blessing itself, Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine on you. It just hammers home the power, the intimacy, tied to actually speaking the name when you're trying to bestow divine favor.
So it feels quite personal, almost like God saying, use my name when you bless each other.
Precisely. It implies God wants to know you personally by name and gives you the privilege, maybe even the responsibility, to use his name when connecting with him. It feels quite different, perhaps, from how we sometimes think about it today, maybe a bit more distant.
Yeah, that tracks. So the emphasis wasn't just on the do not misuse part of the commandment, but actively, maybe even joyfully using it. That's an interesting angle.
That's exactly the case the source makes. Honoring the name means this proper, deliberate use, this invocation.
Okay.
And it actually goes further. It suggests that neglecting the name, or, deliberately hiding it, that's also a way of dishonoring it. Kind of a subtle violation of the very same commandment.
Huh. Like having a valuable gift but keeping it locked away.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Never using it, never appreciating it, but it could be seen as disregarding its value, couldn't it?
That definitely makes you think. Now, the author then points out something that, well, it really jumped out at me. How absent Yahweh's name seems in a lot of modern Christian experience.
It's a powerful observation, isn't it? The author points out how rarely we actually hear or read Yahweh. In our Bibles, often, in prayers, songs, even just talking about faith.
Yeah, it's mostly God or Lord.
Almost always. And this creates, the author argues, a huge disconnect from how the ancient Hebrews experienced it. For them, the personal name was everywhere, every day.
So it's like we know the title, but not the name.
Kind of, yeah. Like being introduced to someone really important, but only ever calling them sir or ma'am, never using their actual name. How much personal connection are we potentially missing there?
And to help us get a feel for this, the author says, try reading the next bits out loud. Why is that important, do you think?
Well, the act of actually saying the name Yahweh aloud, especially over and over as it appears, it helps break that habit we have of just mentally swapping in the Lord. It lets you sort of hear how often it was part of their lives, their worship. It's a practical step maybe to bridge that gap in our understanding, just feeling the frequency of it.
Okay, I can see that. Physically saying it might make it sink in differently. So with that in mind, let's look at Israel's identity. How is being called by the name of Yahweh a defining thing for them? The source mentions Deuteronomy 28 and 2 Chronicles 7.
Yeah, this ties right into identity, doesn't it? Being called by the name of Yahweh wasn't just a label. It was fundamental. It signified this unique covenant relationship, God's personal claim on them.
So it set them apart.
Absolutely. In Deuteronomy, it's even presented as something other nations would see and recognize, maybe even fear. And then in Chronicles, when they're facing trouble, the promise of healing comes specifically to my people who are called by my name, if they humble themselves.
Right.
It's like their whole existence, their essence, was tied up in that personal connection through the name.
It really sounds foundational to who they were. Okay, then there's the act of calling upon the name of Yahweh. This seems to pop up all over the Old Testament.
Oh, definitely. Right from the start, Genesis talks about Enosh beginning to call on the name. That Abraham, Isaac, Moses, the Psalms are full of it.
So it was the standard way to reach out to God.
It seems so. It was the primary way individuals initiated contact, built that relationship, asked for help. It wasn't just some empty phrase. It was intentional. You see it in Psalm 116, after being saved. The natural response is, I shall call upon the name of Yahweh. And Joel 2 gives that amazing promise. Everyone who calls on the name of Yahweh will be delivered. It's this constant pattern of direct address.
Yeah.
Like picking up the phone almost.
Yeah, like having a direct line. A God who wants to be contacted using his personal identifier.
Exactly. Not distant, but engaged.
It sounds like just the natural thing they did. And it wasn't only individuals, right? The priests and Levites had a specific job related to the name.
Yes, absolutely. Their core duty involved ministering and blessing in the name of Yahweh. Deuteronomy 21 spells that out.
And we're back to that priestly blessing again.
We are. Number 6, they were specifically told to invoke my name on the sons of Israel. It just reinforces the power, the significance attached to the priest actually speaking that personal name when they bless people.
As if the name itself carried the blessing somehow.
It feels that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like it was a tangible conduit for divine favor.
Wow. Okay. And then the prophets, their authority seems completely tied to the name, too.
Totally. Speaking in the name of Yahweh, that was the mark of a true prophet. The phrase, thus says Yahweh, thousands of times.
Right.
Like in Exodus or Judges, the examples given. It meant they weren't just sharing opinions, they were delivering God's authoritative message. It was their badge of office, their divine authorization.
They were speaking for Yahweh, using his name as proof. Now, what about Jerusalem? The text calls it the dwelling place of his name. What's that about?
Well, choosing Jerusalem, choosing the temple, as the place where Yahweh's name would dwell or abide, it signifies God's special presence there, his chosen meeting point with his people.
Okay.
Like we see in 2 Chronicles, it was a deliberate act by Yahweh. I have chosen this place for myself. My name shall be there forever. It made the connection tangible, geographically centered, like having a specific address where his name and therefore his presence was focused.
A central hub for honoring the name. And the list goes on in the source, boasting in his name, praising his name, giving thanks in his name. It's really comprehensive.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? You look at Chronicles, boast in his holy name. Or the Psalms, praise the name of Yahweh, like Psalms 113, 135. Thanksgiving in his name, 1 Chronicles 6:2 and Isaiah 25. It's just clear that his name was right at the heart of how they expressed devotion, joy, everything.
It was the focus of their pride, their worship, their gratitude.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does that say about their relationship? Was it just about rules, or was there this deep joy and thankfulness tied to who he was, represented by his name?
That's a great question. And it wasn't just about feelings or words. The name itself was seen as powerful, right? Like a source of strength. Proverbs 18:10 is mentioned.
Exactly. The name of Yahweh is a strong tower. The righteous runs into it and is safe. It wasn't just a symbol. It was seen as actual refuge, real strength, real protection.
Like the name embodied his power to save.
Yes, and his willingness to protect those who relied on him.
And then there's blessing his name, another form of praise.
Seems so. We see it in Nehemiah, Job, Psalm 103. Bless the name of Yahweh. It's this profound acknowledgement of his goodness, his worthiness. Even Job, after losing everything, his first reaction is, blessed be the name of Yahweh.
Wow. Even then.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it? About a foundational trust in God's goodness, regardless of what's happening.
It really does. And trusting in his name is also highlighted.
Yeah, Psalm 33 says, our heart is glad in him because we trust in his holy name. And Isaiah encourages those in darkness to trust in the name of Yahweh. Faith, reliance, it seems intrinsically linked to his personal name.
Okay. Then there's fearing or revering his name. That sounds a bit intense.
It can sound that way, yeah. But it's crucial to see it less as being scared and more about profound respect, awe. Deuteronomy 28 talks about his glorious and awesome name.
So like the awe you feel before something truly majestic and powerful.
Exactly. That kind of reverence. A deep respect that makes you want to honor it, like 1 Kings 8 or Psalm 86 suggests. It's a healthy respect that shaped how they lived.
Right, a respect that leads to right living, and God himself acting for his name's sake. What does that reveal?
Well, it shows God's deep concern for his own reputation, his honor. You see it in the Psalms, Jeremiah, Isaiah. Even when Israel messed up, God's actions were often driven by wanting to uphold the holiness and glory of his name in the eyes of everyone.
So his integrity was tied to his name.
It seems so. His character was on the line, represented by that name.
And for the people, loving his name was a sign of faithfulness.
Definitely. Psalm 5 talks about those who love your name rejoicing. Isaiah speaks of foreigners joining Yahweh to love the name of Yahweh. It signifies real affection, loyalty, commitment.
Okay, then knowing his name. This seems to have layers of meaning.
It really does. On one hand, like in Psalm 91 or Isaiah 52, knowing his name means having an intimate, trusting relationship. He protects those who know his name.
But it could also mean something else.
Yes. It could also signify God's judgment. Jeremiah 16 says God will make them know his power. And Ezekiel repeats it constantly, often after a judgment. Then you will know that I am Yahweh.
So it's either intimacy or a stark recognition of his power.
Kind of a duality there, yeah. You either know him in relationship or you'll be made to recognize his authority.
And that phrase, I am Yahweh, used so often in Leviticus, that sounds foundational.
Absolutely. Around 49 times, the source notes. It's like the signature under his laws. Do this because I am Yahweh. It's the basis for everything he asks, the constant reminder of who he is and why they should follow his ways. It underpins the whole covenant.
Right. And then practices like swearing by his name or saying, as Yahweh lives, sounds very common.
They seem deeply embedded. Swearing by Yahweh's name, like Deuteronomy instructs, was the most solemn oath you could take. You were invoking the highest authority. And as Yahweh lives, you see it all over 1 Samuel, 2 Kings, Jeremiah. It was this powerful affirmation of truth, of commitment, grounding promises in the reality of the living God, their ultimate truth statement.
Wow. Their ultimate affirmation. And even living righteously was described as walking in his name.
Yeah, Micah and Zechariah use that imagery. It means living in a way that reflects his character, his will, consistently showing you belong to Yahweh, not just words, but a way of life honoring the name.
And underlying all of this is the constant command to remember his name, never forget it.
Crucial. From Exodus 3, where God says, "This is my name forever," through the Psalms and elsewhere, remembering his name was remembering the relationship. Forgetting it was like tearing up the contract.
Which brings us to those harsh warnings against false prophets in Jeremiah. They were accused of making people forget his name.
Exactly. Jeremiah 23 is really strong on this. God takes it incredibly seriously when people deliberately misrepresent him and lead others astray, causing them to forget his actual name for, false gods like Baal.
It was seen as a direct attack on the relationship.
Profound betrayal, yeah.
So we've built this picture of Yahweh's name being absolutely everywhere, woven into everything in the Old Testament. Almost 7,000 times, the source says.
An incredible number.
And then the author makes that stark contrast, how the substitution of the Lord has almost totally replaced it for most readers today.
And that substitution, the author argues, has had a massive impact. Replacing that personal, specific name with a more general title. Well, you arguably lose a lot of the intimacy, the directness the original text conveyed.
Right. That priestly blessing example really hits home then.
It does. Because instead of hearing Yahweh bless you, we almost always hear the Lord bless you. And the source makes a strong case that there's a real difference between having God's personal name invoked over you versus a title.
A title speaks to authority, maybe, but a name speaks to relationship.
That's the idea. A title is true, he is Lord, but the name carries that intimacy, that personal connection. The blessing, the text suggests, was powerfully linked to using that specific name, Yahweh.
And even the Shema, hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh is one.
The most central Jewish declaration, even there, the title Adonai, meaning Lord, is typically used now instead of Yahweh, which, again, the source argues, kind of weakens the original personal punch of that statement. Adonai is respectful, certainly, but it doesn't carry that unique personal identifier quality of the name itself.
And the author stresses how vital that name, Yahweh, is to the whole surrounding passage in Deuteronomy 6, the call to love God completely and teach these words diligently.
And these words, as the source points out, specifically include the 10 Commandments from Deuteronomy 5. And guess what?
The name Yahweh appears there multiple times.
10 times. Right there in the 10 Commandments. It just shows how absolutely fundamental the personal name was to the core of the covenant.
Wow. And Moses' passionate plea later in Deuteronomy 32 to keep all the law of Yahweh, it all ties back to this name being interwoven with their very life and relationship with God.
It wasn't just theology, it was their lifeblood, their identity, their connection to the living God, all wrapped up in that name.
Okay, so pulling this section together. For thousands of years, using Yahweh's personal name was absolutely central, foundational to how they related to God.
That's the clear picture from these texts.
And then the author drops that provocative word, a crime, saying this treasure was somehow stolen from God's people. That's pretty strong language.
It definitely gets your attention, doesn't it? The argument is that this near universal substitution has perhaps unintentionally deprived generations of believers of a really vital, intimate aspect of connecting with God.
And they hint the usual story about why this happened might not be the whole truth, something about fake news.
Yeah, that's the teaser for what comes next in the source material. It definitely leaves you wondering how this shift actually occurred.
It really does. But sticking with what we've covered today, this deep dive into these specific sources, what's the biggest takeaway for you about the use of Yahweh's name in the Old Testament?
I think it's just the sheer pervasiveness, the profound way it was used everywhere. It wasn't just for high religious moments. It was in blessings, prayers, praise, thanksgiving, trust, reverence, even their national identity. It clearly points to a deep, deliberate, intentional connection, actively nurtured through using his personal name.
It is pretty stunning when you see it laid out like that, how much emphasis was put on that one name and how different maybe that feels from the experience many have today. You might be listening and be quite surprised, like I was, at just the sheer volume and significance of it all.
Absolutely. And that really leads to a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on. What are the implications of this historical focus on God's personal name? Could understanding this, maybe even reclaiming this practice in some way, actually shift your own relationship with God? What does it really signify that the blessing itself was tied to speaking that specific name? Just reflect maybe on the difference between a personal name and a title in any important relationship in your life. It's definitely something worth considering.